Welcome back to the latest episode of Across the Bifrost. My name's Sung Soo, and joining me in a moment is my dear co-host from across the pond, Pat Dunford, and we're both smiling because we're on video, which is new and exciting for us. You should go to YouTube, you should look up Across the Bifrost, you can find us. Hey, why not? We're exploring brave new frontiers, but let's check in with Pat. Pat, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. The exploring has been all right so far. I'm quite enjoying this being on video malarkey.
Malarkey is a great word. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I enjoy the editing time. I'm learning a lot. Shout out to Richmond Gaming for helping us out. Shout out to GD Nerd for answering my stupid questions I can't figure out by Googling things. It's been a journey, but yeah, bear with us. Bear with us. We're doing okay. People are liking it. We've got more exclusive YouTube content coming out. But today, we're going to be talking about character evaluation. A lot of times people ask us how we evaluate crises, how we evaluate characters, and yeah, we've got some opinions and feelings on this, but first we've got like the all-time hit bit, sleeve it or heave it, and we are going to be covering Weapon X Program, which is an unaffiliated active card for Wolverine and Sabretooth. They can spend 3 power. This character is thrown short. It does not suffer damage if it collides with another character or terrain feature. So, Pat, what do you think of Weapon X Program?
Simple but effective is how I describe that card text. I think this card is really powerful, right? And the reason it's so powerful is it gives you a solid damage output. Both of these characters are size 3 because of Wolverine's adamantium skeleton and Sabretooth naturally being size 3. And so their collision is hitting an opposing character for a big chunk of damage. On top of that, they're getting a short move out of the deal. So this card is giving them kind of 2 actions worth of value, a move and an attack of sorts. Albeit neither one is maybe top tier. The damage is really good, the move, not so much. And then on top of that, you can do it outside of activation. And for me, that's where this card really shines, is it's a fantastic playmaker, but also insurance policy for these characters. You can use it as a tool to help them engage. You can use it as a way to help them secure a daze or a KO, or you can use it as a way to punish somebody for getting close to them even after they've activated in a round.
Yeah, so the modality of the card I really like. Like you said, there's a bunch of different ways to use it. We can utilize it just for the movement. We can utilize it for out of activation movement. We can utilize it for guaranteed damage going through, right? I've been talking to a lot of new players since I've gotten
Mm-hmm.
more active on Discord and explaining the benefit of a throw being like, it's just X amount of damage, which is phenomenal. You don't have to worry about dice or rolling. You don't need dice fixing for it. So I like that aspect of it. I think the
Mm-hmm.
worst part about the card is it's Wolverine and Sabretooth's card, which are
Yes.
characters that are fine, but ultimately are generally unexciting when I put them on the table.
Yeah, I think that is the big downside. It's on characters who are not taken for their own merits, right? And sometimes a team tactics card is good enough that you'll take a character who might not be your first choice because you want access to the card. And I don't think this card quite gets over that hurdle, primarily because 3 power is a pretty steep cost. And the characters that this is attached to are not especially good at generating power, right? They have short range builders that they're probably not starting to use reliably until the second round. And once they've generated some power, they have ways to spend it. So the opportunity cost for this card is pretty high, even in their own activations.
Yeah, like you said, both characters have great. I mean, not great. Both characters want to deal damage. They have good ways to transfer the current amount of power they have into additional damage.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're taking it, it also fights with exceptional healing a bit, which is a card we're both really high on.
Yes.
But it's another card that these characters have utilization of. And I guess since we're going to be talking about how we evaluate characters, maybe real quickly we can talk about how we evaluate team tactics cards. I'm going to paraphrase here, Pat. Please correct me if I'm wrong or add anything else on. We value things that give you actions very highly.
Mm-hmm.
We then look at what is the opportunity cost to take this in my list, which is what we're talking about now. Does it to make us take a character we wouldn't normally take? Does it fight? Does it require a bunch of different multiple characters in the case of multi-character cards? Then what is the opportunity cost to use it in a game? How easy is it for me to trigger this card? Do I need characters standing next to each other, juggling with hula hoops or something? Or is it a low power cost? And then how often during the game do I see myself being able to utilize this card? And when we look at those things for Weapon X program, it's characters we don't really love, and its power cost makes it to the point where like I don't really know when I'm going to be able to utilize this card. Is it late round two if one of these characters takes a lot of damage? Is it more realistically turn three or turn four when these characters are on their day's side already?
Yeah.
It's just kind of hard to predict.
Yes, and that's really the thing holding this card back because its effect in isolation is incredibly powerful. Imagine if this card was on Juggernaut or Hulk, right? Size 4 characters who have always got enough power to use it, right? Just imagine this card would be an auto include with those characters, and it would be considered one of the very best cards in the game.
Well, I mean, I think on a on a less quote unquote crazy version of this card, but you put this on any of the quote unquote common threes or
Hmm.
value threes that we see out there, and all of a sudden it's an extremely relevant card, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, you can put it on Valkyrie, right? You can put it on Luke Cage, you put it on Iron Fist, you put it on Iron Man, any of those characters, and we're immediately really happy about this card.
Yeah, so it really comes down to the fact that it's hard for the characters who can bring it to use it, plus they're not on their own merits that popular. So because it's hard for them to use, it's not really increasing their popularity.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're both heaving this card, unfortunately, but that's okay. Sometimes we heave cards. That's why it's sleeve it or heave it. Otherwise, it'd just be a sleeve it segment. And it was a great segue there, Pat. We are kind of down on Wolverine and Sabretooth, and we think that's aptly so. We looked at the cards, we tested them, we used a bunch of games with them. We came back that the characters just are a little bit lacking. But I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today is how do we go through normal character evaluation? And Pat, why don't you lead us off here?
Yeah, so this was an episode that I really wanted to do, and I twisted TT's arm to make sure that we could do it today on the pod. And the reason is, at the time of recording, we've just had ELEKTRA previewed. So this might date the episode. Sorry if there's been too much time traveling. Um, but what often happens when we have new previews from AMG is we immediately have a lot of hot takes, right? The Facebook groups, the Discord channels, they go crazy with opinions about characters. And those opinions are diverse, just like our player base, right? Of course, there's going to be a mix, which is great. Um, but something that I personally don't like to see is people that are very, very negative about characters straight off the bat without playing them. And I think when you do that, you're doing yourself a disservice. When you spread that feeling, you're doing the community a disservice. And you're ultimately sabotaging your ability to use those characters effectively and to enjoy them, and potentially doing that for other people. So that's why, for me, this episode is important. I would like to spread some good practices about character evaluation. And I'd also like to encourage some positivity because I really think that trying characters first, giving them some tests, and thinking about their best case scenarios is a much better approach when seeing new stuff than immediately being down on it and spreading that negativity.
And that's one of the things we've tried to emphasize with the podcast. We know a lot of people have requested we give more scalding takes, I guess, for lack of a better term. And A, that's just not in Pat and I's personality. And B, we generally do believe the things we're saying. It's not like we're lying to get podcast listens. Like like I appreciate each one of you listening. I don't care enough that I'm gonna, you know what I mean, feed a machine or spread falsehoods to get stuff out there. So um let's focus on Electra a little bit here. You said a lot of things here, Pat. Where do you think some of the analysis for Electra has kind of gone off the rails a little?
So I think one of the things that happens most commonly with character evaluation is people immediately look at what they perceive to be the biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses of a character, which is totally fine, right? It's pretty normal. That's kind of how you define characters a lot of the time, especially when we have so many in Marvel. You need to be thinking about where does this character fit in the pantheon of characters that are available to me in my affiliation or my unaffiliated slots. Um, and with Elektra, you're looking at her survivability, which for a four threat character is nothing to write home about. It's definitely on the lower end. And her unique feature, which is her power generation, and the fact that she doesn't have a traditional builder to generate power with attacks, but rather she has Out for Blood, a rule where she generates 1 power if she deals damage with any attack or superpower. So for her, that's martial prowess, impale, or her ancient throwing thing, ancient flowing
Blades.
blades. Yeah. So a lot of people have been looking at her and saying, well, she's really squishy. She doesn't generate power. Why would I want to use this character? And it's those things are true. Those are definitely drawbacks to the character. But in my opinion, it's way more productive and constructive instead of asking that rhetorical question of when would I want to use this character and waiting for somebody else to answer. Try and think for yourself, okay, what's this character good at? When can they shine? What situations will this character really excel in? And how could I create these situations myself on the table? How likely am I to want to be in those situations? And can I manufacture them?
I think, and I'm going to step back a little bit and then we can circle back to Electra. You can tell me if my tangent goes on too long here, Pat. I think one of the things that people do that has always kind of bothered me is people say this is the best three or the best
Mm,
four. And for a while, I was on board. There was a best three. And I think it was Valkyrie. And it's because she could do, to your earlier point, almost everything.
yep.
Um, but I think AMG's done a great job in the 1.5 edition. We've kind of balanced some stuff back into scope here. And now when I look at threes or fours in the case of Electra, I'm saying, who is the best at performing the task that I need performed? And that might be standing around and not dying. And then we could argue about is a Black Dwarf or Kingpin, right? Both of those characters are phenomenal at standing around and not dying. When you look
Hmm.
at threes, you could talk about what are my best assassin characters, like you said, going across the board, ripping things away. We have long range blaster characters like Iron Man. We have durable characters like Luke Cage. And all of those characters end up with different roles and different niches. And I think it's important when you look at Elektra to consider that she is bringing a mechanic that none of us really have time with,
Hmm.
and evaluating her compared to the previous archetypes is kind of inherently flawed, right? Until we really get time out there with these hand ninjas, see what the grunt mechanic ends up looking like, because this character might end up filling a role that they're an archetype, excuse me, that doesn't currently exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to character roles, like you said, TT, some characters are inherently more specialized than others, right? Um, Sometimes a character will be so specialized that they'll be the only choice to do the thing that they do. Or that might be siloed by threat level, right? They might be the only 3 threat character to do this, or the only 2 threat character to do their thing. Um, and that will naturally give them a home, even if that thing they can do isn't necessarily what you want in every game, even if it's not objectively the most powerful thing. When you want it, you go to those characters, right? Those specialists. And Electra's a great example where she can summon hand ninjas. You know, there aren't very many characters that can summon grunts. If you want to be able to summon grunts, maybe you take Electra, right? She's one of your 3 choices. Um, so that is inherently useful and therefore is a reason to play that character. On the other end of the spectrum, you have characters that are just good, flexible generalists, like you said. And at that point, you're looking for a range of flexible options or you're looking for efficiency in those options, right? And you're trying to do that maths of is this the best way that I can spend my threat value without really knowing what my situation is, right? In a given generic situation, do I think this suite of abilities outshines the other one? And I think that's what people do a lot, but it's fundamentally flawed because characters always exist in context, right? They're never in a generic situation where they're being compared to everyone else, and they always have to contend with the crisis being played, the terrain they're playing on, the characters they're with, and the characters they're against, plus team tactics cards, right? There's so many variables that I think people fall into the trap of considering characters best in general circumstances, but actually, general circumstances don't exist.
I think that's a fair point. You know, we've mentioned a lot of times how much affiliation tags even matters for a character, how like
Hmm.
earth shattering of a change that could be. We could go on a long list of characters that if they picked up like ABC affiliation tags, suddenly they're just like world beaters, right? But because they
Yep.
don't, they're not. And to your point before there, Pat, like you know, we've talked about this before. I'm guilty a lot of times of just kind of math hammering things like, oh, mathematically, this attack is phenomenal, right? But it's can you get in position to make these attacks? blah blah blah, et cetera, right? And there's all these different things to factor in here. And on Electra, I do want to point out that like her quote unquote builder that doesn't build power is a phenomenal attack, right? It's a range 3/5 dice mystic attack, wild pierce, wild bleed, and she summons people.
Yeah.
It seems
And
like a phenomenal attack, and everyone's just upset because like, well, it doesn't gain power. I'm like, okay,
yeah.
but it does all those other things.
Bear in mind, summoning the ninjas, they immediately get to do a 4 dice attack, right? So at that point, this attack is looking kind of equivalent to a lot of people's spenders, right? 5 dice plus 4 dice with a pierce and a bleed. You know, that's not that far away from something like Dragonfang.
No, it's
And
definitely not, right? I mean, it's. I normally compare it to more like a flurry trigger, right? You end up with a weak flurry trigger off this thing, or a ricochet trigger when you
yeah,
associate in the hand ninjas. But it's more than that, right? Because you have a model that can then activate, deal with things, interact, movement block, even as we see Juggernaut and Hulk kind of rampaging around the meta. So I think there's a lot there in Elektra. I don't think we need to talk about Elektra specifically here, but I know we have some characters, Pat, and I think it might be beneficial to jump through some of these that we were right or wrong with to begin. And I don't mind talking about Lockjaw, who I thought was going to be this meta defining super support piece. And I think it was played in like 5 lists in all of TTS season 7. And I
yeah.
can go through exactly what I ran through. It's like this character is incredibly powerful for positioning
Hmm.
your heavy beater on the center line and just starting this heavy attrition chain really early on. Later on, the character is super relevant by what is it, bloodhounding? I think it's bloodhounding, right? To give you the additional die and attacks against the character. I'm like, oh,
Yep.
Lockjaw is going to be a great character on your rear D. But in actuality, the tax of a 3 threat character that does absolutely nothing after round 1, and I'm exaggerating, I understand, but not by that much,
Doesn't do a lot.
is huge, right? And I think that's the main reason that Lockjaw has kind of been, well, that and an errata to his tactic card has kind of been kind of forgotten or pushed out of the meta.
Yes, he's a specialist that does what he does better than anyone else, right? He teleports people reliably and incredibly far. He can do it from turn 1 to multiple people. He is the best at moving people around. And that is a great niche to have. But when we were first evaluating this character, UTT, like you said, and a lot of other people were looking at that specialization and thinking, oh, wow, this character is the best at something that's powerful, therefore he must be completely broken. Because I like this thing already, and this is a better version of it. And I already think this thing is good enough or too good, so a better version of it must be insane. Without considering that even a specialized character is a sum of all of their parts, right? Not just that one thing that makes them good. And Lockjaw is a great example where he pays a high price in his character budget, right? He he is not really worth 3 threat aside from being able to teleport people. And teleporting people has a significant drop off over the course of the game, right? It's really good on round 1, and then it gets significantly worse in later rounds. And he is probably better than his threat value in round 1, but he starts to fall behind pretty rapidly after that.
Yeah, those 4 dice bites with a reroll just don't quite cut it. And even Pat and I try to test a lot. We get a lot of games with characters before talking them. And I think one of the issues is I was testing Lockjaw in situations where he could succeed. And I think it's the golf swing mentality, right? Where you remember the swing you hit really well and you kind of forget the swings that weren't great. And you're just like, yeah, you know what? Magneto on round 1, easy days, put another bunch of damage into another character, and that was all because of Lockjaw. And later on, maybe you don't remember, or maybe the game just goes your way, so it doesn't come up. They're like, oh, and Lockjaw then didn't do anything for the rest of the game, right? You
Mm-hmm.
compare him to Red Skull, but then Red Skull brings a long range energy attack. Red Skull also brings you a leadership. Red Skull is just able to stay more relevant than Lockjaw ends up spending, even for that additional threat you tack onto him, right? Because one of the initial comparisons was, you also got to remember the meta changes, right? But way back in the day, this Red Skull, MODOK, slow turtle, where I'm just putting MODOK forward, threat projecting out here over the center points of these, and people kind of walk into it, right? That's basically what we were running into or projecting kind of with a Lockjaw Brotherhood thing, and it just
Mm-hmm.
didn't end up being true.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Lockjaw has actually ended up in a pretty good place where he has taken sometimes, which with the number of characters in MCP, like any balanced character is not going to be taken that often, right? There's only so many roster slots. He's taken very frequently in his affiliation, and occasionally outside of his affiliation, because he has a specific role that he is the best at. And when you want to do that thing, you still go to Lockjaw, which is great. And it's good that we were wrong that he was overpowered, because otherwise he would be ubiquitous, right? Because he is the best at that thing. And if that thing was too good, then there'd be no replacement. You just have Lockjaw in every list.
And I think and I think that's a great point, Pat. And just to dovetail on that, right? His affiliation tags go a long way too. Do you
Mm-hmm.
want to spend one of your, let's judiciously say, 2 to 3 unaffiliated spots on Lockjaw? And for a lot of people, that answer comes up no now. And it's because there are a lot of compelling threes out there, and you just end up wanting a piece that can do a little bit more. So Lockjaw is a character that obviously I and a bunch of the community rated really highly in beginning, and then kind of settled in on. A character that the community was kind of meh on at first, who I know is a cult favorite, is Lizard, right, Pat?
Yeah, so Lizard is one of my favorite characters, and he's a character that I personally was very high on from the start. And I remember distinctly defending Lizard in our Discord channel, um, because Lizard was quite a polarizing character. And without going through his whole card, the thing that people were hanging up with Lizard was his 4 dice builder, right? He's got his tail, it does 4 dice physical with a wild push. In terms of damage output, that's about as bad as it gets for an attack, right? Physical is the worst attack type, 4 dice is as low as it gets. This is an attack that you see on 2-threat characters. Toad has basically the same attack with 1 less size on the push. So that is obviously not good, right? Although the push is nice to have when it works, it's not a great attack. However, so much of Lizard's kit is really powerful. And in particular, he has 3 parts of him that work 4, 5. He has a bunch of parts of him that individually are fairly innocuous, but together enable him to be the best at what he does, right? Those things are his medium base plus medium move plus wall crawler gives him just enough mobility to be really relevant, and in particular, enough mobility to get to back points, right? He can contest your enemy's points on B maps and on F maps, right? He can get spider infected. He can contest infinity formulas. So he hits that break point where you might look at all those things and go, that mobility seems fine, without necessarily realizing that's a break point that he hits where he can reliably get to that spot because of Raw Crawler plus his movement plus his base, regardless of the terrain. And then in terms of survivability, he has his damage reduction plus his stamina plus his regeneration. And that adds up to being basically the toughest 3-threat character, right? And so he becomes a little bit of a specialist, right? In the sense that he is the best at something. For his price point, he is the toughest 3-threat character. But when you add that to the mobility, whoa, now you've got a combo, right? Because when you have a character that is really tough and just fast enough to do cheeky things, well, then you've got a character that is unlike anyone else, right? Because you can send that character to steal enemy extracts and get away with it, or at least expect to get away with it quite a lot of the time, right? Just because he's really tough and just fast enough. And everyone was focusing in on his weakness. This guy doesn't hit very hard, without thinking about his strengths and how they combine together to give him a very specific, very powerful role.
Yeah, and I think there's just something that's not, for lack of a better word, sexy about the things Lizard does.
Mm-hmm.
I at first when I played Lizard, I was like, I don't really understand it, and I think I said, like, I think he's fine in Criminal Syndicate. I'm not really excited to play him, but using him for these kind of quote unquote daring plays in the opening round is actually exciting, and there's a lot of kind of dynamism in him. Okay, is he going to survive this? How deep can I dive here? Different things of that nature. So I've liked him playing him more. But when you look at him, and another character I'll mention here is Luke Cage, right? They don't look terribly exciting, but in terms of what they do on the table, I can't stress how relevant these characters are, right? Like Luke Cage is someone, when you ended up selling Man Avengers for this season, I was like begrudgingly put in my roster, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
he'll be fine for Mutant Madmen, but he's just so consistently annoying that he's great, right? When you compare him to a character like Iron Man, and Iron Man's like, yeah, Iron Man's great, he does a bunch of damage, pew pew pew. That's, it's just this thing where, like, there are some things we prioritize because we associate it with being fun or it's easier to visualize, right? A medium move with wall crawler and a medium base, yeah, all of those things are on the front side of Lizard's card, but that's very different than when you get Lizard out on the table. And instead of playing passive with him, right, you are more aggressive. You're stealing that midline thing with him. You're going onto your enemy side of the board and ripping those things away from him. So
Hmm.
I think that's a great example of a character that needed to be played with more. And I think it's a great evolution of the meta in general. Like, oh no, okay, Lizard is right, right? Whether that's you advocating for him or other people, I think it's great that Lizard has kind of risen to the popularity he has. And again, we're putting him in situations where he can succeed, and we literally don't care what the tail whip does.
Yes, right. If the tail whip pushes something, great, but you're never, ever, ever planning that as your number one strategy. I like that you brought up Luke Cage because he is a character who I think people were quite down on initially as well. And unlike with my Lizard example, I too was a little bit down on Luke Cage. I was definitely on Team Iron Fist when Luke Cage and Iron Fist came out. And I played Iron Fist in my Avengers team and left Luke Cage at home, although I did have Lizard. Um, and the more I've played Luke Cage, the more I've liked him, and now I take him in preference to Iron Fist. And I think, trying to put my finger on why, I think what Luke Cage exemplifies, similar to Lizard, is he has a lot of synergies in his character card. And in his case, it's just about being tough enough plus having too dangerous to ignore. Like with Lizard, it's being tough plus being fast enough to abuse it. Luke Cage is tough enough and has a way to leverage that in Too Dangerous to Ignore, so that his being tough can become a real cornerstone of your strategy. You throw Heroes for Hire on top of that, which also synergizes with his resilience and enables Too Dangerous to Ignore in a lot of circumstances by moving him into the action. And you have a really powerful package where he is incredibly good at defending his teammates, probably better than anyone else, and can survive while doing it.
Yeah, for me personally, my evaluation of Luke was just I rated Heroes for Hire too. I just did not realize how incredible that card was for my initial
Mm.
playing and testing with that card, right? Just I was like, yeah, it's kind of like Lethal Protector. I get it. He kind of moves around, but like changing where the power is spent is gigantic because we take it
Huge.
off a character that doesn't have the easiest time of generating power, and the guaranteed throw versus the theoretical vision or Venoms going to attack you back and do a bunch of damage. Like those are very fundamentally different. And that was one of the things, as we've seen on the table, and the popularity of Heroes for Hire clearly shows that card is a beater. The sleever for Heaver for Heroes for Hire would be very short.
Yeah, it's one of the very best cards in the game. I love it. Um, yeah, so we talked about Lizard, we talked about Luke Cage, a character that I think had an interesting reception and has an interesting life cycle so far that I wanted to bring up is Carnage. Because Carnage is a character who, like Lizard, when he was previewed, people immediately honed in on his weakness, right? His defensive stats are really weird. He's got 5 physical defense, he's got 1 energy defense, he's got 1 mystic defense. And TT, I know this one riled you up a bit, right?
I just don't understand why people are like Venom is so much more survivable. Like I remember someone saying Venom's twice as survivable. I'm like, whoa, hold on.
Because he's got
Let's
2 energy
let's
instead of 1.
let's yeah. Let's calm down here. I don't think you understand how this works. Like it's just it's I A, that's not true. He is not twice as survivable as Venom. Let's just get out there. Let's get that one out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's another situation where everyone focused on what he couldn't do,
Mm-hmm.
which was not take damage consistently when energy attacks are thrown at him. But like, okay, who really cares? But they missed, and you got to remember at the time, Doom Prophecy was unaffiliated. All you've got was in the meta, and people started using that on Carnage, and he just murdered things
Yeah.
because he's really good at painting the town red, and that's what he does. And it was just a phenomenal usage of this just absolute melee beat stick that Cletus ended up becoming. And it's one of those situations where everyone was so focused on what the character can't do that we kind of missed or didn't realize or didn't actualize on what the character could do, which was just put on an absolute beating with symbiote tendrils and maximum carnage.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a really good example of what I would say to go back in time to those people, right, who were down on Carnage because of his 1 Mystic and Energy defense, is don't worry about if he's in that terrible situation where he's being shot multiple times by Star-Lord or something, right? Think about how can I get him in a situation where he's going to shine? and think about how can I leverage his combo potential in his case, also just his 5 physical defense in general, and his good suite of abilities, right? Where he can get extra attacks, he can get area attacks, he can heal himself. How can I maximize those things? And the answer was, whoa, this character is really easy to maximize and incredibly powerful when you do. And this is what I mean about having that positive attitude when it comes to character evaluation. If you're trying to think creatively about how to get the most of a character's attributes, you might stumble upon something that turns out to be really, really good. And even in the worst case scenarios, I mean, a character is going to be pretty respectable when they're in their ideal circumstances.
Right, and we just have to look at how often is the character able to get themselves into ideal circumstances. And for Carnage, it was honestly pretty often. Especially, I can't remember the Carnage. He's got one tactic card I really like, not the one that roots people. Anyway, my brain's not working there, but I like Carnage, and I'm glad that Carnage had his day in the sun. And I think we'll see a lot of, not a lot, but I think we'll see Carnage in the future once people. We talked about it before with the 1.5 readjustment. No one's to play anything that's nerfed. I think a lot of the perceived things with Carnage right now as well. All you've got's gone. He can't do Prophecy anymore. I don't really know what I'm going to do with him. He's still a really good character. The update on Goblin's card for the Spider-Foe's leadership is super great
Mm-hmm.
for him. Just passively not getting to explode crits. He's a good character. You want to just murder people with a symbiote? Carnage is great.
Yeah, and to give you a specific example, TT, of something people might be overlooking, right? Carnage's 5 physical defense is pretty unique and is really powerful in certain situations. Plus his movement, he's medium move with a medium base, so he can get to back points on B. He's incredibly good on Mutant Madman, right? The Crisis, that's a B map where you use your physical defense to flip the points. He can act last on a team, walk up to a point that has been taken by the opponent with one or sometimes even two characters contesting it, and still have a good chance to flip it into your favor, right? He can be an incredibly powerful specialist on that kind of crisis while ignoring most of his card, right? Just those particular features are unique and powerful and can be leveraged.
Yeah, and Carnage rules. That's the card, right? It's just a phenomenal card. I really, 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 really like that card. We covered it way back when in the Carnage box, but gives you almost two soft actions, right? An enemy character moving a free attack, which,
Yeah, it's real
yeah,
good.
I'm all for.
Yeah.
So that's another character that we think was kind of negative at the beginning, a little positive. This podcast is way more negative than I think I normally like it to be. Amazing Spider-Man is a character that everyone absolutely adored.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of coming out the bat, and Pat, you remember, I'm sure, when I was dojoing Web Warriors, I'm like, I take Amazing Spider-Man in my roster, and I think I'm right in taking him in my roster, but I almost never want to take him in my 5,
Mm-hmm.
and it's shocking how kind of quickly Amazing Spider-Man has not fallen from grace, but fallen from the popular perceived eye.
Yes. Really interesting, right? And this is a character that had some very obvious strengths, right? He, alongside Angela, is one of 2 characters who can long move into the middle of the table, grab an objective, and run away. He is incredibly hard to damage with his great defense dice and full rerolls, plus witty banter. Um, so his strong mobility plus his damage mitigation, it puts him in like a better version of Lizard, right? In the sense that he can go anywhere and he can be really tough and he can do cheeky things. But he's also got some weaknesses that are a little bit harder to quantify. And for him, his main problem, in my opinion, is the 5 threat. That's definitely a problem. But the thing that I was going to call on more than the 5 threat is, as a character package, his big challenge is power generation.
Hmm.
Because when you're really hard to hurt, you don't get a lot of power, right? Taking damage is one of the 3 primary ways you get power, right? You've got the power phase, you've got your builders, and you've got taking damage. So removing one of those from him, in the sense that he's hard to hurt and one of his defensive abilities lets him spend power to take less damage, means that he is always running with very low amount of fuel. And I think that combines, like you were alluding to, TT, with his 5 threat value, to make it just so it's hard to get really powerful activations out of him.
And as a counterpoint, I think some of the players who have found great luck with Spider-Man now are running him in Dark Dimension, right? With Dormammu. Why? Well, Spider-Man has a problem with power generation. If you can web swing every turn, that opens up a lot of functionality with Spider-Man, right? And Spider-Man and Venom are two characters that I love with Dormammu because it really opens them up, right? Venom is web lining every turn, which is a medium push, which is absolutely insane for those of you who don't
Hmm.
know. And then Amazing Spider-Man is placing himself within 3, right? And that ups his builder from a 5 dice builder to a 7 dice builder, right? So it helps him with his mobility, helps him with the double attacking. So people have found ways to mitigate their weakness. They found kind of homes in different places. And I think that's a great place to be. But again, Amazing Spider-Man, a character everyone was high on, and now I don't think it's a stretch to say the vast majority of people have shifted back to Miles, and we use Amazing Spider-Man sometimes. Like, I think the use case that you pointed out was like on Gamma, if you want to be Spider people and you don't want to die, you take Spider-Man, and I think that's a fine home.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Plus,
I think the community was a little higher.
yeah. Plus, if you want to use his leadership, which I think in some matchups is real good.
The
Um,
leadership can definitely be good. Placing people, never bad.
yeah. So I think a lesson with Spider-Man that maybe also applies to Elektra, to circle back, is just thinking about a character's power economy and how demanding are they for power, right? How much power do they need to have like a normal turn? Do you know what I mean? Like, are they expecting to be able to do really useful things without spending any power? Do they need to maybe use a 2-cost superpower to have a pretty solid turn? Or are they one of those characters that wants to have a lot of power in order to unlock their full potential? And how satisfied are you with each of those cases? Do you know what I mean? Spider-Man is a character that if he has 10 power, he is superb, but not very satisfied on his normal turn by turn play. And I think Elektra is someone everyone looked and said, well, she doesn't generate much power. But actually, I don't think she needs a lot of power because, like you said, TT, her free attack is so strong and so likely to give her the second power after the power phase power. And her superpowers cost 2 each, right? I'm very happy to have very strong attacks and a superpower. That seems absolutely fine to me.
Yeah, and I think one of the other important things to remember, and it's important to reevaluate characters. Like, everyone was down on Crossbones. He gets a criminal syndicate tag, and now we're like, oh, Crossbones is real good, right? And this
Hmm.
is, I was just down on Colossus. We talked about Colossus like 4 to 10 episodes again because I'm bad at counting, right? And my issue with Colossus, like I've seen this before with Steve. I don't understand how he's going to generate power, and then he gets a Brotherhood affiliation tag. And you know what?
Hmm.
Colossus and Brotherhood is phenomenal because they've like, yeah, here's 2 extra power around, Colossus. Go do whatever it is you need to do, right? And it's just little things like that can all of a sudden you just be open minded on the characters. I really think that affiliation tag in Colossus was huge.
Yeah,
And yeah, I agree with you. Elektra doesn't need a lot of powers. It's just, um, yeah.
yeah,
But
she really
again,
doesn't.
we'll see here. And this pod isn't meant to like pat ourselves in the back. Pat and I have talked about many times here in this pod where we have gotten things wrong. Let us be clear here.
Hmm.
All we're trying to say is just keep open minds on things. If someone is really excited about something, don't pee in their Cheerios. Because I think Pat and I both firmly believe you can win with almost anything in this game. I
Yeah,
think we both agree there is a top quote unquote tier, and those tend to be characters who do things better or uniquely in their lanes than other characters. But you can solidly win with anything. And one of the other characters I want to talk about is a Dizzard favorite is Cable, right? Nathan Summers, who everyone's like, it's Rocket Raccoon who costs 5 threat, but it's a lot more, right? Because the benefit of wet works, which you've talked about ad nauseum, the ability to 2-inch place, range 2 place on that giant base of his
yeah,
with a range 5 attack. He's always double attacking. And then he's got flexibility to do other things, right? A really, really cool throw. A size 4 throw is not nothing. And then the shield can also be useful. So I like Cable. He doesn't play the way I normally want to play the game, but if you just want to pew 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 with a plasma rifle, Cable's real good. And I've played against him plenty of times. Like, God, this character is effing annoying.
yes, totally agree. I think Cable suffers a lot from people looking at specific parts of his card at face value, and looking at them on paper and declaring them to be too weak without really considering the full range of circumstances and the context in which they exist. And by what I mean by that is people say his attack isn't strong enough. And I mean, look, I wouldn't hate it if Cable did another dice of damage, but he doesn't need it. And the reason he doesn't need it is that he's got range 5 and he's got mobility, right? He can have a move action for 3 with his body slide. And when you combine those things, plus potentially Cat and Mouse or the X-Men leadership, depending on what affiliations you're taking him in, he's a character that can double attack from turn 1 for the whole game. And so he is just making many more attacks than the average character. And you don't quantify that when you look at the character card, right? You can look at him and say, oh, he hits about as hard as Baron Zemo, right? 5 dice for the reroll. And what you forget is Baron Zemo attacks at range 2 and is fragile. And Cable is attacking you twice a turn every turn from a long way away and is much tougher. And so the and so he will just put out more damage over the average game than Zemo because of that, even if it won't necessarily come in a spike. And even if Zemo's best turn in the game is better than Cable's best turn, Cable will still contribute more.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even mention he has a wild incinerate at range 5,
Mm-hmm.
which is incredible, right? I mean, all
Yep.
of a sudden Venom has like, Carnage level defenses, so it cuts his survivability in half. Like that incinerate is huge. Um and really relevant. And Cable's best turn is really good. We
Yes.
just never see it. But in theory, it's
It
real
can
good.
happen, and when it does, like when he gets to do like a shot plus a body slide plus an area attack plus a throw, he can take out multiple people.
Yeah, again, we just almost never see it. But his best case is good. And I can't emphasize what Pat mentioned enough, right? Attacking from range 5 is one of the best ways to keep yourself alive. I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you, like, Iron Man's durability is phenomenal, is really good, well documented. But one of the best things he has is a range 4 attack that pushes. He's like, I'm going to do damage. You're going to go over there. That's fine. We're done. And my opponent's like, are you going to move up? And I'm like, no, I am not. I'm going to stay in this point. You are far away from me now. I've did 2 to 3 points of damage. That's all I want. And we're just
Mm-hmm.
going to keep going.
Yeah.
So Cable, definitely a character. Yeah, I agree. Could Plasma Rifle be 6 dice? Sure. Do I think it matters? Not really,
I
right?
think it's probably for the best that it's not, honestly, because when
Wild
you add
Incinerate is great.
yeah, when you add
And
that extra dice to every attack twice around for the whole game, it really adds up to a lot.
And again, put him in situations to succeed. If your opponent has a whole bunch of stealth characters, okay, maybe I leave Cable at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a scenario where he's going to be able to sit on a back point, either a B or a D, bounce around, double attack, I think he's real relevant. He can attack a lot of the board sitting on a B, right? Whether he wants to power slide east or west or just double tag the person across from him.
Yeah. Another part of Cable's card that I think gets a bad rap because it looks bad on paper, but is actually better than it looks, is his leadership, right? Where it works. And people look at this leadership, which lets you reroll 1 attack dice, and they compare it to some others and say it comes off badly. Okay, so comparisons, you could compare it to Black Panther, King of Wakanda, right? Where he spends a power to reroll attack, defense, or dodge dice. And you can do it in every roll, whereas Cable's is once a turn, right? You could compare it to Green Goblin, right, with Oscorp Rapamry, where you get to reroll one of your opponent's defense dice once per turn, which is mathematically slightly better damage output than rerolling an attack dice. You can compare it to Star-Lord's Winging It, which is 3 sets of 2 rerolls. But maybe, in theory, you could say that those leaderships are better, but in practice, I really don't think they are, because when you compare them, they're not the same. And by saying one is better, you're thinking about one in its preferred circumstances, right? So what I mean by that is, yes, if Black Panther has infinite power, right? If the Wakandans have infinite power, then they can reroll more attacks than Cable, right? But X-Force get to do it for free. And on top of that, yeah, they can do it on every attack. But you know what? Not every attack needs a reroll. Sometimes your rolls are good enough. Sometimes your rolls are going to be so bad that a reroll doesn't save you. So it's not like you're getting half as many rerolls with X-Force as you are with Wakanda. In fact, in real terms, you're probably getting more with X-Force because you're not having to pay power for them. And it's the same with Guardians. Like when you stack rerolls on top of a character, the fact you've got to do it in the power phase means that sometimes those rerolls are wasted, right? You might not need 2 rerolls on attack because either the attack is bad or because it's overkill, or your character might get neutralized, like pushed away, dazed, whatever it might be, right? They just might not get to use those rerolls at all because you allocated them in the power phase. Whereas X-Force, with their 1 reroll a turn, is very reliably wanting that little bit of extra that they always have access to. And so that leadership, it's it looks kind of unassuming, but actually it adds up to a lot over the course of the game. And other leaderships might look better, but they're only really better in their best case scenario, which doesn't always come up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a yeah, I think it's a great point. So, um, yeah, no complaints from me there.
Have I sold you TT, or are you thinking I'm crazy? You're a Green Goblin man.
I love Green Goblin, but that's just I like Green Goblin more than I like Cable. And I really like Carnage, who we talked about earlier. And my love of Mysterio is well documented. My round one TTS League opponent's like, I'm shocked you didn't play Mysterio. I listened to your podcast. I'm like, oh, you actually do listen. Everyone says they listen to the podcast, but then he like quoted several things. I'm like, oh no, you actually listen.
Gave you proof.
Yeah, and I'm like, I just didn't think it was a good scenario for him. I still gotta play him in good scenarios. So
What was the scenario?
it was a D.
He's
I'm
not
just
really,
not playing.
D
Yeah,
is like the worst for him.
not gonna.
Yeah.
It's just exactly right. It's just not gonna go very well for him. So, um, Pat, I do want to wrap us up here. I think we've kind of talked about nauseam, and I think the big things we want to stress here is just it's funny for us who create content. Like, listen to multiple pieces of content, try to come up with your own opinions, and just test stuff. If you really like Elektra, if she's like your favorite Femme Fatale character, great player. You'll do absolutely fine. I can't tell you how many times people like you're making a mistake shoving Mysterio into your Avengers roster. I might be. There are times I regret having him, but I really like Mysterio, and I would rather play with the characters I really love than get a slightly better win percentage chance. I think it's important to have an open mind and don't be afraid to revisit characters, especially as times change, the meta changes, new cards come out, new affiliation cards, different combos and things come out. I think that's just important stuff to remember.
Yeah, my takeaways that I want to reiterate. First up, understand that your hot takes and first impressions are likely to be wrong, right? We all have them. It's normal and it's exciting, right? I get really excited when we get the previews from AMG and we get to talk about new stuff. But so many of those opinions are inevitably going to be uninformed and they're going to be misinformed. So don't be beholden to that first opinion. Play games with the characters and try and figure out the situations where they're going to shine, right? Remember that characters don't exist in a vacuum, they always exist in context. And you have a big opportunity to create that context by putting them in the right situations, right? Taking the crises that suit them, putting them in teams with leaderships and tactics cards that complement them, right? Other characters that synergize with them. You can do a lot to make any character good, and don't fall into that trap of comparing them all to this kind of like blank slate, idealistic, perfect character in a generic circumstance, because that's not what the game is about.
Just because the internet says you're wrong doesn't mean you're wrong. And one of the most easiest ways to point this out, is kind of wrap this out, is Utility Cookie and Morgan Reed. Okay, believe it or not, if you're new to MCP, there was a time where Thanos and Black Order were not viewed as a powerful affiliation. I know
And we
it's
said
hard
it
to believe.
ourselves, right? So find an opportunity where we were wrong, right? We were pretty
Ex-
down on
ex-
Black Order in our
right.
Revelation review a long time ago.
And Morgan Reed and Utility Cookie put a ton of work in, and now everyone's like, how am I going to deal with Thanos? What is going on with Thanos? Nerf Thanos, right? All these things, right? He hasn't, okay, the gems have actually changed a good amount, but at his core, he's still the same character. And he was the same character 3 months ago, rampaging the meta and causing interesting things, right? It's just one of those cases, innovate, come up with new stuff, test things. That's what I love about the game. The game is so wide now. I think it's really, really cool, the different things we can go here. So, Pat, I do want to wrap us up with something a little more lighthearted. I've got a trivia question for you. No more singing. We're done with that. Stop sending me song requests. We're not doing it again. But a trivia question I have, Pat. There are a few characters that have the most affiliation tags in this game. So I want to know if you know how many affiliation tags these characters have, and then can you name these characters?
Oh my gosh.
So
Okay.
what
So
characters do you think have the most affiliations? How many affiliation tags do you think a character has at the top?
I can think of characters that have 3. There must be more than 3, though. I'm sure we can do better than 3.
How many? How much better?
So, like, it's going to be at some point, it's going to kind of divide like good guys and bad guys to some extent, right? Although there is a little bit of overlap. So, so for example, I'm thinking of characters like Blade. Blade is in Midnight Suns, Defenders, and Avengers. Pretty sure that's it. That's a 3. You've got to be able to do better than that. I'm thinking of characters like Kingpin, who's Criminal Syndicate, Cabal, Spider Foes. That's only 3. Got to be able to do better than that. How about someone like Wolverine. Wolverine is in Avengers. He's in Defenders. He's in X-Men. He's in X-Force. He's in. Is that it? Is he just in
That's
four?
it. That's it.
Okay, so I did a
So,
four.
so I'm going to help you out. 4 is the top. And there's one more character, I believe, that has 4 affiliations. You got Wolverine. I was going to give you a clue. You didn't even need it. There's one other character with 4. Can you think of who that character is? I'll give
Um,
you. I'll give you as long as you can monologue and keep the podcast interesting. As soon as there becomes an uncomfortable silence, I'm going to tell you who it is.
okay, I don't think it's a mutant. I think Colossus is the only mutant in all 3 mutant affiliations, right? He's Brotherhood, X-Men, X-Force. Magic is in Convocation, but she is not in some of those other ones. So I'm crossing out the mutants. This isn't a trick question, right? You're not like counting Winter Soldier, are you?
I'm not counting Winter Soldier.
Okay.
It's not a trick question. The character is in 4 distinct affiliations. And I'll
How
give you
many
clues if you want clues.
how many affiliations is Black Cat in? She's in Midnight Sun, she's in Web Warriors, she's in Criminals. That's it?
No, there's one more.
She's in another affiliation?
She is.
Is she the one? Is she the character with 4?
She
What?
is.
Oh, is she in Defenders?
A-Force.
She's an A-Force. Of course she's an A-Force. How silly of me.
Wow, Pat. Well done. Black Cat and Wolverine, each repping the 4 affiliation tags on them. Wow, that's impressive. Good job, buddy. I didn't think you'd get it. I'm legitimately impressed right now. I would not have gotten it. And I actually really like just how you broke that down. So, hey, good job there. So,
My
yeah, that's,
encyclopedic knowledge CP finally paying off.
yeah, you're never getting that gray matter back. I just want you to know. Well, we do want to genuinely thank you all for listening. We are on YouTube right now. You know, we if you go to YouTube, search for Across the Bifrost, we come up. We can't get a branded URL until we've been out there for 30 days. So I think we got to wait another week or two. But eventually, youtube.com/across the Bifrost. So we really appreciate you there. Go to acrossthebifrost.com. If you want to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/across the Bifrost. We're going to do an ACS, which stands for After the Credit Scenes, where we do a bonus episode. We've got some fun stuff lined up. It's only 15 to 30 minutes where we go into a little bit more detail stuff and look for a character spotlight. We talked about some of the cool things Angela can do with movement. That's coming up on YouTube soon. So we do want to genuinely thank each and every one of you for watching or listening or however you listen to us. And until next time, everyone, cheers and happy gaming.
Cheers.